Pepper sprout. We've been talking about Jackson ever since the fire went out. And I'm going to Jackson. I'm gonna mess around. Yeah, I'm going to Jackson. Look out in Jackson Town. Well, down in Jackson. Go ahead and wreck your health. Go in your head, you big donkey man, better be full of yourself. I'm going to Jackson. I'm going to comb your hair. Jackson. See if I care. That's the first time I've sang a duet on both a male and female voice.
You did a really great job. I'm sorry I couldn't lean in more there.
No, it's good. Welcome to the show, Jayda.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping. Guys, welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mirshahzadeh. And we are so lucky to have my friend Jayda Batchelder here today with us. So, gosh, it's been a wild week. Do you mind if I do a little bit of housekeeping?
No, please go ahead.
Awesome. Guys, so we are the Greatness Machine. And as you know, if you've watched the show, the Greatness Machine is all about people who have lived their passions to create greatness in the world. And my friend Jayda is neither short of passion nor greatness. So we're going to be talking about some amazing things today. But before we do that, I do want to do a bit of housekeeping. First of all, we are live. So start a watch party. Share this with friends. We're going to be talking about some amazing stuff around education, South Dakota, cowgirling, SoCalin, you name it. We're going to be talking it. We're also going to be talking about social entrepreneurship and conscious capitalism. So I'm really excited to chop it up with my friend Jayda. But yeah, share, start watch party, ask us questions. I got my team on standby. They'll be shooting questions our way through the comments section. With that said, I'd like to jump into my bio here for Jayda. Jayda is an entrepreneur, educator, and founding executive director of the nonprofit Education Opens Doors. Most importantly, she's a rodeo cowgirl at heart, and she's an amazing person who I call my friend. So, Jayda, welcome.
Well, thank you. It's so good to be here, and I am honored to be called your friend. The feeling is certainly mutual.
Thank you. So, Jayda and I met. So as you guys know who listen to the show, I talk about I talk about Stagen a lot. And I talk about GOT, which is my MIT group, a lot. And so last year, or February this year actually, Jayda and I graduated from the Integral Leadership Program at Stagen, ran by Rand Stagen, who's our mentor. And we get to spend 1 year, 52 weeks, week in and week out on calls together and practicing and doing all these things around how to become conscious leaders. And then we'd fly into Dallas once a quarter, where you live in Dallas. So that's
I do. I live in Dallas. So you just came to visit me.
I would just drive in, but because I'm in Austin, but a lot of people flew in from all over the country, and we had amazing people in our class. I mean, some of the top executives and CEOs and entrepreneurs, probably in the United States at this point. And so we learned all around this idea of conscious leadership. And now we're both graduates, so we get to apply these into our lives. And so, yeah, here we are.
Here we are. We graduated right before, who knew it was coming, our shelter in place. So we got to have a fun graduation and a long graduation night of celebrations before this. So a great way to end our class together. Definitely.
And so I don't know if Jayda will remember this, but in Stagen, we have weekly calls. And so on the weekly calls, we do it's almost like a dojo. We get to practice the things that we're learning, and they do these breakouts. So our first weekly call we did, Jayda was the first person I partnered with. I don't know if you remember that you and I were partners.
I'm really sorry, and I don't remember that.
I have like a stupid memory where I remember really awkward, weird things. So why would anyone remember that? I don't know. I remembered it because I was in the Orlando airport. And I had to go and find a quiet spot.
So I remember that. I remember that part of the call. I guess I just don't remember being our very first breakout together.
The very first breakout of the very first group call. So I was stressing because I was in the middle of a large Epcot Center airport. But yeah, it was really cool. We got to talk and so we connected then, and it was and I first realized, I was like, wow, this woman's doing some really, really cool things and has very interesting perspective. And so why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind?
Sure. I'll try to be short and sweet, but probe wherever you'd like. So as Darius said, I live here in Dallas, Texas, but I had not been to Texas before the day I moved here, or before I officially moved here 11 years ago. I grew up in rural South Dakota, and I am the first in my family, along with my brother, to have the opportunity to go to college. And I went as far away as one could imagine to a place as different as one could imagine. I went to college in New Orleans. So,
Wow.
Going from South Dakota to Tulane. And as a college graduate, whenever I was really looking at all of the opportunities that were afforded to me, both domestically and internationally, I just really realized, wow, like access to my education truly set me up for a lot of success and a lot of access that friends or peers from home don't necessarily have. And so I just made a decision to apply to Teach for America, really thinking, okay, before I go on with the life I have planned for myself and these big, bold dreams, I'm going to give back to education, which has done so much for me. And so applied to TFA and moved to Texas. As the charter corps in the Dallas Teach for America core region, which basically is taking recent college graduates or other adults who are changing their careers and putting them into under-resourced schools. So I quickly became an 8th grade science teacher at the age of 22 without any previous plan to be an educator. So that was an interesting, to say the least.
So in 8th grade, were you guys dissecting frogs?
So in 8th grade in Texas, well, I guess you're in Austin, but in Texas here, it's every 6 weeks is like a different, they try to fit everything in. So for 6 weeks, I was a chemistry teacher, then I was a physics teacher, then I was a biology teacher.
Wow.
And so we didn't dissect frogs. Physically, we did it virtually. I worked in a school that was really under-resourced, so there just wasn't those types of opportunities.
Really? I think that's the one thing I remember from junior high science was dissecting a frog. I think that's an important thing for kids to do.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I remember it from growing up as well. But that was not something that we did at my school.
So let me ask you a question. So under-resourced is an interesting word because there's a lot of politics around education and around resources for education. And I'm a hardcore centrist, which means I listen to both sides of the aisle. And one of the arguments, I was listening to this guy, he's based out of Dallas, and he's like, he has this show on YouTube. It's like, convince me this is blah, blah, blah. I can't remember the name of the show. I should look it up right now. But it's like, basically like, convince me that there's institutional racism in the world. And then he'll sit there and he makes all the right-wing arguments for why it doesn't exist. And he talks to people on the other side, and he does a pretty good job at it. It's not a heated argument, but he's got his data down. So one of the things I heard him say that was really interesting, and it was around institutional racism, was that the most underprivileged schools get the most amount of resources. Literally, he said this. And I'm like, that doesn't sound right to me at all. So, and obviously this guy's not an educator. This guy's trying to make his living on YouTube saying provocative stuff.
Yeah.
The kid he was arguing debating with was this African-American 19-year-old kid that worked at like Starbucks, right? So who actually was really bright and had a fair amount of his own data that supported his position. When he said that, I remember thinking like, that doesn't sound right to me.
Right.
And so you coming from Teach for America, from boots on the ground, having lived this, what are your thoughts on a comment like that?
That it's misdirected. I can't speak exactly to school funding, and it's different by state. But when you really think about funding allocation, I can speak about the school that I was in. It's schools that are in under-resourced communities or lower income communities. What funds public schools, right? Tax dollars.
Property tax, right?
Yeah, and so property tax. So if you think about that, I can speak specifically to the school where I worked, which was everything was on a budget. We were choosing between supplies or a full-time teacher for my principal. And so, school funding is consistently changing across through policies across the state. There's a really big bill here in Texas that passed to really shift how we think about school funding and how schools are held accountable and how they're able to receive funding. So there's a lot of progress and innovation happening to change that and ensure that it's not our schools who are serving students who have, financial struggles already, who are then also the schools who are getting the least amount of influx of resources and funding.
So yeah, I think that his argument may have been more of a political argument that the money's squandered, right? That the money goes there, the money goes to all these places, and that the most underprivileged, constituents get the most amount of funding, but that it's not allocated properly and not managed properly.
Mm-hmm.
But so before we jump into that, though, I'm going to tell you my experience, right? Because I'm a person that's coming on the other side of the spectrum, which is I've grew up in an upper middle class area. I've always lived in areas that are that are not underprivileged. My kids, when they've gone in both private and public school, when they go to public school, and my friends whose kids are kind of the similar upper middle class, upper class
Mm-hmm.
in public school, I'm going to tell you what happens there. We cut checks.
Mm-hmm.
Like the school gets whatever it's going to get from wherever it's going to get it from.
Mm-hmm.
And parents all step in and start cutting. I mean, I think it's at least a couple $1,000 a year is the expectation per family.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's almost like a private school in that we're funding the public education out. Like, this is above and beyond the tax dollars. This is like, you go to this school, $3,000 check is what the education is. If you can't do it, you don't do it. But it's kind of like, you better do it.
Right. Well, so you're supplementing, right? And if you look at a lot of schools in large urban areas or in rural communities, the parents don't have that disposable income or that additional income to be able to invest in the schools. And also, just to your note, perhaps what the gentleman you're talking about was even referring to, there's even across Texas, like there's an allocation of funds from the state, basically, like think of it as like Robin Hood, right? Like take from the schools that are more affluent and put them that have higher property taxes and put the funding into schools that have lower property taxes. And so, which, is the only way we can even get close to thinking about equitable access and education. Because if not, your zip code will continue to define the opportunities you have, right? You have all the potential, like potential is equal across every student in every zip code, but zip codes currently, they tell you what type of opportunities you have. They predict outcomes for students. And a lot of that has to do with just truly not having access to quality education and opportunities that others do.
Yeah. So on paper, that sounds great. And the reason that he's bringing this up is he wants to blame the family, right?
Yeah.
His thing is, there's no such thing as institutional racism. There's just an inordinate amount of broken families in poor communities. And that's where it's a structural issue. And if you go back, and they all want to blame LBJ's Great Society and say, well, no, if you look at divorces and single motherhood and stuff like that, there was way less of it in underprivileged communities before the 1970s. And now it's like the worst, right? And so, no, it's not really a educational issue. This is a financial issue, or this is a cultural issue. Right.
Well, I mean, I would just say hard stop on the idea that institutional racism does not exist, right? Like systems of oppression are what's leading to the inequities in our school systems. And we can have an entire dialogue on that if you like, but, something that's really important to me and, it is actually a core value, speaking of the organization that I founded and now have the opportunity to lead, is equity and a deep commitment to that. And what does that look like? And what does it really look like to be an anti-racist organization and, call out what's happening in our community, call out the barriers and the obstacles that some face that others don't. And when you look at education specifically, there is, clear instances of systemic racism perpetuated for our students and their families.
Do you mind diving in? I mean, I don't want to make this a whole show about institutional racism, but I do think that there is a huge issue around institutional inequity, which is what it sounds like your organization has kind of stepped in to help provide for these underprivileged communities. So I do think that it's part of this element of what we're talking about.
Sure. Well, I mean, I can just give an example going back to my organization. When you think about, I think a lot of the lack of access to opportunity for students and a lot of the barriers that exist also are an information gap. Like students are not shared. There's not that hope created. They're not told about the possibilities that exist. And if you can't see it, you can't dream it, right? And so when you're told, you know, you're from this community, no one in your family has gone to college, everyone you know stays and works in this community at, you know, a minimum wage job, and that's what you dream and that's what you believe. And so what we do is try to shift that and try to change that narrative and start early enough to kind of put that, you know, what is the purpose of school? And in doing so, an example to your point is we worked really hard in everything that we've built to ensure that we're not perpetuating stereotypes, that we're not, you know, filling our resources and content with unconscious bias towards students, particularly because we serve primarily students of color. And so it's really, really important that we uplift all experiences, that we provide information for all students, so that they're able to really see their own potential and understand truly, how do I access the opportunities that are available to everyone, but are primarily accessed by those who have the information to know how to do it.
Interesting. So, sorry to cut you in there, but so essentially what I heard you just say is that we have this issue around, it's not necessarily about the resources existing. It's about the fact that if my mom works at Walmart and my dad works at a gas station, and they're oh, by the way, like there's a much higher likeliness of single parenthood here. So like they're not, it's not like they're spending a bunch of their time sitting down with me with homework, going through all these opportunities that exist, because literally they're probably working 3 jobs, right? That the kids don't even know the resources exist. That maybe if I come from a more affluent area where there's more resources that are like educating these kids and the parents are more involved, that they get those resources if they need them. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. So I would say, you know, and I can go back to my own experience, right? So my brother and I, first in our family to go to college. I had 2 working parents who told me from day one, like, you're going to go to college, like you're going to, but they had no idea how to actually support me on that journey, right? So they didn't understand, you know, take AP classes and then take the test because it will get you college credit. Or there's this thing called the FAFSA that can help with financial aid. And so if someone is not actually teaching me that and providing me that information, then who's telling me, right? And so then when you think about the fact that students who are exposed to that information, or who had parents who had the opportunity to navigate any sort of post-secondary option, they might understand that, like, you can't actually start worrying about it your senior year.
Right.
A lot matters before, but if no one's telling you, you know, I taught so many students who really thought, like, if I go to school, I take the classes I'm supposed to take, and I get good grades, then my senior year, I just get into a college, right? Like, no one, like, what's the actual process? What are the deadlines? How do you apply? What's the importance of, like, community service or a resume, or making sure you're actually even taking the right classes, you know? So there's just so much information that I think folks who maybe grew up surrounded by that information assume is in all of our schools. But the reality is, you'd probably think, like, oh, that's the job of a guidance counselor. Like, that's the job of a college counselor, college and career counselor, right? Which, yes, and there's on a national average, there's 1 counselor for every 482 students. So, like, think about that, right? What it means actually is that a student on average gets 38 minutes of college and career guidance during their entire 4 years of high school. And so to really think about, like, what are my dreams? What are my hopes? What am I good at? You know, what are the options for me? How can I even begin to think about paying for them? You know, a lot of students, and myself included when I was younger, like, you don't dream of the elite institutions because they're financially out of reach.
Right.
You don't know that there's actually, you know, opportunities to be able to possibly pursue them. Like, I ended up at Tulane. They recruited me, which was really crazy, for an academic scholarship. And, you know, I wasn't looking at a school outside of kind of like South Dakota and Reciprocity, the states that surround it. Yet I got in and I got a great scholarship. And I later found out that they were looking to have all 50 states represented.
Oh.
And they were missing South Dakota. So, I mean, like,
Right.
I never would have known to even think about, you know, applying to an elite private institution because I didn't know there were options to pay for college. And so that's one personal example, but really just kind of trying to frame that not all students are provided that information. And then, you know, when you're a senior, I don't want to say it's too late for students, but if they would have known earlier, they could have made different choices.
Yeah, I mean, look, I came from upper middle class area. I was in all AP and honors classes. I was just super social, so I let my GPA slide pretty hard my last 2 years.
Imagine you being super social, Darius.
Who'd have thunk it, right?
Who would have thunk it?
But I was like that guy that had like really high SATs, but but I was like, oh, I don't have to do any work or go to school and I can get Bs because I'm one of those people that can work hard and not work hard and get Bs. And that's by the way, that's a total entrepreneurial trait, right? Like I'm like, that's called efficiency in entrepreneurship, just so you know. This is good for being an entrepreneur, but so I ended up not getting into any colleges. I got into one college I applied to. And my parents both have master's degrees, right? They just weren't like, for whatever reason, I was so self-sufficient. They're like, figured I'd get into a college and that was it.
Yeah.
And so I got into one college, UC Santa Cruz. And by the way, I was like president of my school, tons of community service. I was captain of my wrestling team. I was one of the top wrestlers in the state of California. And my GPA was just not above a 4 point. It was like a 3.8 or something like that. It's not going to get you into UCLA. And I only applied to UCs. I ended up, I don't even know what reason. I was like, oh, UC Davis has a wrestling team. I called the wrestling coach and was like, hey, here's my tape.
Yeah.
And they turned over I went from not getting in to getting in. I'm using this. So literally within one day, I got my letter saying I wasn't in to being here. Congratulations, you're going to UC Davis.
Yeah.
And so the reason I bring this up is I'm someone who grew up in an environment of lots of means and support. And even I didn't know that, oh, if you're a good athlete, what's the path? And I have friends whose parents were hiring coaches for them.
Yeah.
And, I mean, outside of school, right? And this is all public school. So I think to your point, there's so much out there. It's so hard to navigate. I can't even imagine if you don't have resources, what it's like to navigate that. So can I ask you a question about how did you go from this, you know, it was Teach for America. Is that correct? How did you go from Teach for America to be like, I'm starting my own nonprofit?
Yeah. Hey, hold on. Let me close the blinds. I feel like I'm just like glowing right now.
Okay. Yeah, you look fine though, but sure.
Sorry. Okay. So that's a really great question. And I would say, much like you, I think entrepreneurialism is in my blood. My grandfather was a horse trader. I think there's like rumors he sold like a yak or an ox to Walt Disney. Like, I mean, the man built his own business, right? And then my other grandfather like ran a glass shop that he owned and operated. And my dad became he started a business to sell and repair horse trailers. You know, his dad was selling horses, trailers would break. He found his own niche. He built his own business. And so I actually, growing up, didn't know anyone in my immediate family who wasn't actually just an entrepreneur, who wasn't a self-starter, who built their own business. And so I think that helped diminish like the fear, right? Because it just felt so like, this is just what you do. Yeah. But so I was in the classroom and what I saw was, you know, my students who were rock stars. Like I taught, like I said, 8th grade science. And their standardized tests, you know, of course, in states and here in Texas, it was called the TAX. It's now called the STAR. But my students blew that standardized test just like out of the water. Like their scores were better than the scores that year of most of the students in the Highland Park Independent School District here in Dallas, which is a very affluent school district, right? So when you look at like raising expectations and really enabling and equipping and activating students, they will succeed. They have so much potential. And so I was just on fire after that. Like my students had done so well, yet I went to go visit them in high school and, you know, just really saw something I wasn't expecting, which was just the harsh reality that like I had taught them academic content and I had like helped inspire hope about their future. We talked about college. We talked about, you know, what they want to be when they grow up. But my students were already making choices that were putting them off track to their aspirations, and they didn't even know it. And so, you know, another example to your question of like institutional racism in schools is unconscious bias or tracking, where a counselor might look at a student and say, oh, you belong in this class. And a lot of times that is based off of an unconscious bias about race and skin color or about background. There's a lot of, you know, kind of research internationally. This happens in a lot of countries. I don't know if you remember, I missed a class because I was studying education overseas and talking to a leader in Amsterdam. And the same thing was happening in the sense of, you know, when it's an adult's decision who doesn't have the opportunity and time to really know the student, you have to just make judgment calls. And so you choose like, oh, you probably belong in this class. Oh, you might not be college material, right? So if someone's either saying that or just putting you into a class that doesn't line up with what would be necessary for college material, you don't know it. And so what I saw when I was there, and to no ill will of the counselor at all, right? Like sometimes it's unconscious, sometimes the student doesn't have time with the counselor. Anyway, what I saw when I was visiting my students was that like they were enrolled in some of my brightest students were enrolled in low-level courses. You know, one of my students was in like cutoff jean shorts, and he walked up and said like, I just finished my first job interview. And I said, you went home and changed, right? Like, what? And he's like, no, why? And it was just this moment of, no one's teaching you professionalism. No one's, you know, like, how are you to know that that's not what you would wear to go try to get a job, you know? And so really it was 2010, which was the start of my second year of teaching. And I just had this like epiphany that said, okay, I'm a recent college grad. I have a lot of friends who are fellow teachers and recent college grads. Like, how hard can it be to write a book that's basically all the things that are like not traditionally taught in school, like all the things that a student would need to know, but there's not dedicated time to do that. And so I just wrote an email and said like, let's do this. No plan of starting a nonprofit, no idea that this is what was going to happen, right? Like I was just probably like wired on coffee and thinking like, this is a problem, and I think I have an idea how to solve it, you know? And so we wrote the first version of the book in that year, and just the hope, the agency from students, my students' parents. A lot of my students' parents are, you know, not native English speakers. And so they also would just say to me, you know, just the sentiment of like, thank you, it's all in one place. It's so easy to read. It's so easy to navigate. Like we literally have like 6th grade through 12th grade, step by step, what do you need to be doing to be able to like understand the choices you're making in school. So anyway, I used that for a couple of years in my classroom right alongside my science content. And in 2012, I think I just had this realization that like more students deserve access to this than the 140 students who walk into my classroom door every year. And I have no idea how to launch a business, but I'm pretty sure I can figure it out. And so I won a $5,000 teaching award from Texas Instruments for Science Teacher of the Year. Wow. And I used that to quit my job and launch an organization. Wow. It blows my mind. But when I think back on it, I think I was like just young enough, just naive enough, had that entrepreneurial spirit, and had a deep passion and an idea of how to solve a problem that's pervasive across our country.
So you're like, I got $5,000. I got enough to start my own business.
I said, I can live meagerly. I mean, also as a teacher at the time, I wasn't making that much money. So that was like 2 months of, you know, money for me to live on at least if I did it well. And so I just thought like, this gives me a couple of months to see if I can figure it out. And then I just hit the ground running and, you know, made the decision after like about a month or two to turn it into a nonprofit. I had no idea what I was going to do. I was kind of thinking like, where's the first source of revenue going to come from? And it was a donation. And so I said, this is a nonprofit. Like, let's do it. Yeah,
that's so funny. So you just reminded me of, for myself, the first company I started, I'd saved up like 15 grand. And I was like, quit my job. I was like, started my company. Like now, I mean, like same type of deal. I was 25 when I did this. And I was like, oh, my living expenses, like, you know, like I was just like so used to living so cheaply. I'm like, oh, I got a couple, you know, at that point I had probably 6 or 7 months of living expenses But I had to take a bunch of that money and invest it in actually building the business too. So I probably had like 3 months of runway, and I was like, that's enough for me.
But isn't that like the beauty of it? Because like you eat what you kill. And so I think if someone would have just given me a bunch of money, I mean, I don't know that I would have had the same just gumption and, you know, out of necessity, which is what I'd witnessed in my own family. Like no one started their businesses for them, right? So I think I'd like seen that, like, you know, I mean, you know, that work ethic, that like grit that is just necessary to launch something from nothing.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like, and I grew up with entrepreneur. My father's an entrepreneur. Same deal. I mean, came to the country essentially, like, was forced into a situation where I didn't have any money because of. It's a long story, but I mean, he was borrowing money from my grandparents to buy gas for a gas station that he had just bought. You know, because he didn't even have money to buy the gas for the gas station. And so when you have to eat what you kill, like hey, like you're at a cliff. You either like do it or you fall off the cliff, right? And to your point, when your back's against the wall, there's a lot of motivation to make it work, you know, any which way you can, and you get pretty innovative. I love the story that your grandfather was a horse trader. I'm like, because that's like this kind of this analogy in business, like, hey, let's go horse trade, right? But like, no, literally my grandfather did horse trade. Like he traded horses. So
until the day he died.
What's that? Say that again?
I said until the day he died, like he never stopped.
It's so cool. So and that even brings me to another point, which is the world we're going into right now is a much more entrepreneurial world because the barriers for entry on entrepreneurism have dropped because of the digital world we're in. There's a lot more funding around it. The traditional paths, even with college and education, have changed. And when you're talking about these students and the way there's this unconscious bias around them, you reminded me of I have a twin brother. And my twin brother, did you know that?
No, I feel like I'm learning so much about you.
Yeah, I have a twin brother. I have a little sister and a twin brother. My brother is my business partner actually for the last 20 years. Now we are polar opposites, but we're a nice Venn diagram. In the middle we're like insane people. We have the same sense of humor, but we're very different. And so I was kind of like until the end, I was like a straight A student until I was like, I don't need to try to get B's, right? And so I was always a good student. I didn't have to try. I was really into sports and student leadership, and I was in like all the different Key Club and all these different clubs in school. And my brother, who was ADD, hyperactive, had like basically probably dyslexic or some version of learning disability around reading, was the opposite, right? And so he got and he wasn't like a big athlete growing up. And so if you don't have, and when you're a kid, it's pretty simple. Like there's, at least now, maybe it's different, but back when we were kids, at least, or when I was a child, was you're either good at sports, school, or like you're a leader, right? And if you're one of those three, you fit the box. And if you fit the box in one or two of those three, like you do pretty well. You get a lot of attention. People will like support you. If you're not good at any of those three, you're not good at sports, you're not good at school, and you're not like a go-getter that's like supporting the community, the school turns their back on you because you're a pain in their ass, and you're hyperactive, and you have like learning disabilities. They're like, this guy's a resource drain. He's a pain in my ass. So it was really interesting for me to be a twin with someone like this, who I'm on the other end. I'm like zero maintenance. Like I show up, I support the teachers. I'm a role model for other students. I'm like, you know, in all the best classes. And I'm like, you know, literally like the opposite end of the spectrum of my brother. And they would say stuff to me. They'd be like, what's wrong with your brother? You know, which was so super weird because my brother is an amazing person. Like, my brother's literally one of the most amazing people I know. Like, he just doesn't fit the box. And they would say stuff like, your brother's going to end up in jail. Like, just crazy. Listen to the kid. Like, I'm an adult now. I was like 15 and someone was saying this to me. I was actually in 7th grade and someone was saying some shit like this to me. And I was like, who talks about kids that way? You know? And so to your point, educators are humans. They have emotions too. And if some kids making their life hard, they might, you know, maybe they're not the best person and they're going to say things, or they're going to have these unconscious bias. And you and I grew up with parents who are entrepreneurs. So like, you started your business with $5,000 in the bank. I started mine with a little bit more than that. But like, these are kids that don't have that, don't have educated parents, don't have a community that's supporting them. And so you built this organization really to like come out and start, essentially, it sounds like creating resources for these kids. Is that correct?
Yeah, but resources. So if you think about, and even to your point earlier of like, perhaps there's a rise in entrepreneurship and the ability to innovate because we're decreasing the barriers to entry, right? So what that also means is there's kind of a change in narrative of, what is the goal of school? And it's not, success isn't only a 4-year degree, right? Like it's just not, and it's continuing to change. And there are really amazing trades. There are great like 2-year programs and vocational programs, just different credentialed degrees. And so literally what we exist to do is make sure that students know what are all of those options, and like, why does it matter? And research shows that, you need a post-secondary credential. So think like some sort of education after high school equates to, greater economic prosperity over time, less likelihood to be unemployed. But that doesn't mean a 4-year degree.
Sure.
Yet 4-year degrees are the right choice for some people, but our whole hope is to say, how do you change the narrative that like 4-year degrees and elite institutions are for students who have access to that information and have access to that money, and the other options, or just high school graduation is enough for others, right? And so what we do is we've basically built, and what I built 11 years ago is nothing compared to what exists today. Our program's on its 10th edition. We've supported about 60,000 students across mostly Texas and a few surrounding states. But what it looks like is I just thought about, like, I was a former teacher, and I thought there's so much information that if I would have taught my students, it would have helped them. Like, what is a GPA and why does it matter? Or, what are the actual options after high school? Or, hey, you're really good at sports. Like, how do you actually become a college athlete, right? Like what's the info they require, right? So I was just thinking about this different information. And so our model is to say, well, who actually spends the most time with students every day? It's teachers.
Totally.
And so can we, instead of saying, hey, counselor, there's one of you for 500 students, and the counselors are amazing. Like, we love them, we support them, but like, that's an impossible feat. And so instead, we've built this just turnkey program that we train teachers to facilitate in their classrooms right alongside math or science or the elective course they teach, or in their homeroom. We really work with schools to say, like, where will this fit on your campus? But it's already ready-made. Like, it's already completely ready to go. And so what we actually do is train teachers so that they can equip students with the information that is just generally not taught in school, but the information that will then inform students to make intentional choices. So, even in Texas, again, a Texas example, but it's across the country, there's a lot of choice that's happening in 8th grade. So students, there's a ton of school choice here. We have early college high schools, we have dual credit degrees. Students have to pick something called an endorsement as an 8th grader. It's like a college major. Like, you're picking, what path am I going to be on? And you're on it for a couple of years. And that also determines like the classes you're in, perhaps the school you're going to. And a lot of times students are like, well, I'll just do the one that my friend did. And it's a science, program, but like, I'm like a creative art student, but then they end up in these schools that are just like not a good fit. And that happens as early as high school.
Wow.
And so our whole thought is, if you can inform students of their choices, help them see their own potential, and then just give them access to the resources, and couple that, give their parents access too, so that they can truly just be intentional about the choices that they're making, because it's not common knowledge, right? Like, common sense isn't common. And the idea of like how to navigate high school and be on a path to college and career and a meaningful life, that's not common knowledge. Like, you have to be intentional about it. You have to think through those things. And so that's our model. It's just to train teachers and work alongside those who are already pouring their heart and soul into the lives of students, and make sure that students have access to this. And, we do it through, I could talk more, but there's a whole lot that goes into it. But the cornerstone of it is a really wonderful workbook that's literally just everything in one place, step-by-step guide.
So cool. That's so cool. You have my wheels spinning so much right now. So one of the things that, I don't know if I told you this, but about I don't know, last March, I started.
Nope. Darius? Well, I don't know if anyone else lost him, but I certainly did. Let's see. Well, looks like it's just me. Hopefully I'll be back soon.
Hey, can you see me?
I can, yeah.
I don't know what happened.
You just disappeared.
I was like, what just happened? I think my something. Let me get back on my computer. Sorry, everybody.
That's okay. You know, I was gonna start like singing and dancing, trying to entertain.
This has happened 3 times now. My son, it happened to him when he was on the show, and he just totally went with it. And then it happened to another person that was on the show, and she just talked for a few minutes. So here, I'm gonna jump back on the show. Let me go. All right, there we are.
All right.
I'll jump off here.
Okay.
I don't know how to jump off. Oh. There you go. Kick myself off. Wow, that was painful.
It's fun. Anyway, you're back. I thought I'm having all sorts of technology issues, so I literally for a minute was like, "Am I still on the show?"
Did I just kick Darius off the show? Yeah, that was. Sorry about that, everybody. This is one of the fun parts about being live. Is like crazy stuff happens sometimes. So where I was going with that was I said when my brother, about 18 months ago, I started meditating, a meditation practice. I mean, I like people on the show who watch the show know I say this. I said, before I started this, I used to say, there's 2 things in the world I hate, meditation and hiking. And I still hate hiking, but I do love meditation. And Monique actually said, I said this to Monique on the show, who Monique is a friend of ours.
Yeah.
And Monique's like, well, Darius, you need to come hike. That's because you're hiking in the United States. You need to hike in New Zealand.
Did you start meditating because of Monique? That lines up almost when we were in Stagen.
No. Although it wasn't because of Monique, it was. I've discovered Sam Harris's course. And I had this life event happen, and anyway, but the point that I was trying to make was nobody teaches you that mindfulness and awareness is something that literally I think it's one of the most important things you need to learn in your life, and there's a practice associated with it, right? And in Stagen, which you and I are graduates from, it's all around, what Rand says, and I love this, is with awareness comes choice, right? Everything you're saying right now is about awareness, right? And so I like to use, again, my brother as an example because I watched, I grew up with kindergarten through 12th grade with my brother. And this is side by side, and I was kind of the whiz kid, and he was the guy that was just out of the box, And back then there was trying to label him and trying to say he's this or say he's that. And there wasn't the support. And one of the things that I've become aware of as an adult is this idea around strengths and strength-based learning. And again, and I think that innovation and technology are helping bring an awareness to that there are these different paths, right? And that, hey, and I'll even say this, going to college is probably the wrong choice for most people. Going and getting a 4-year degree in communications and being saddled with $100,000 of debt or $150,000 of debt is, excuse my language, but effing insane, right? I'm 20. Hey, by the way, I'm 18. I'm going to make a decision that I need to have 100,000 post-tax dollars to pay off. So I got to go make Post-tax means after I save and pay my bills and save for my kids' college education, I have to have an extra $150K plus interest to like pay off this decision I made when I was a teenager.
And probably without a lot of like choice or information to make it, right? Like students end up crippled with debt, and that's part of, so yes, exactly. Like when Rand shared that quote with us, with awareness comes choice, like it resonated so deeply, because that's maybe not that concisely, but that's exactly our mission, right? Like students will make informed choices. No one wants to not pursue a fulfilling life. No one wants to not be able to, have economic prosperity or not be able to achieve their dreams. And they're not making choices on purpose, right? Like, so exactly, like with awareness comes choice.
Yeah, you just made me think of it. And so, we're probably have about 10 more minutes in the show, and I want to get to two things with you. So first of all, going back to this thing that I said around strengths-based learning, what are your guys' thoughts around? Have you guys done a lot of work around that topic, or what are your thoughts around strengths-based learning? Because I'm by the way like a heavy practitioner of Strength Finder. I love it as a tool. I trained about 500, maybe I trained actually about 750 of my employees on it. And I was the trainer, so I fell in love with the tool. And my friend who taught me the tool, I said to her, I can't believe they're not doing this in school. And I said the same thing when I learned a meditation. I said, I can't believe you're not taught this when you're 5 years old. And the app that I use is Waking Up, and it's by Sam Harris. Annika Harris, his wife, teaches a course in the course, so you can get this. It's free on Apple, on the Apple App Store. If you have kids, my recommendation is go check out Waking Up course by Sam Harris. And there's Annika Harris teaches meditation that you can teach to your kids directly, and it's like game changing. And I mean, my kids, I've taught them how to meditate, and one's 7 and one's just turned 10. And so, going back to what I said before, like those are the two things where I'm like, yeah, here we are in school, and we're teaching about content, right? Which I don't even know any content. If I'm curious about something, I just go online and Google it now.
Right.
So we're spending a ton of time learning content. When to your point, they're not learning life skills like how do I decide what I want to be when I grow up, and what am I good at? What is my why? Maybe it'll change. What are my core values, right? What do I care about?
Yeah.
And how can I apply that to live a fulfilled life? Because I didn't learn what the word self-actualization was till I was in my 30s. Right? Yeah, these are things that we can teach our kids so that they can pursue not what their friends are doing or not what their teacher says that they should do, or some unbiased conscious, unbiased counselor says, oh, you better go do this or else you're going to be working at McDonald's, right? So why don't we teach them the skills they need so they can make those decisions for themselves? What are your thoughts around that?
Amen. Yes. So I would say, the reason why goes back to, if you think about if schools get funding from, how students score on standardized tests, it makes it really difficult to create space that is not focused on those standardized tests. And so, that's kind of a bigger broken system. It's archaic. It's the way we think about school and the ultimate purpose of school. Really, I think it's our charge and this generation's charge to redefine that and redefine what does school look like? What is that experience for students? How can it be personalized to the student versus like one instructor, 30 students all learning the exact same thing out of, a physical workbook at the exact same time, so that they can pass a test about the moon phases, right? Right. But we do need students to learn how to learn. And we do need students to learn, of course. I mean, the content is important and academic rigor is important. And I'm in no way negating that. I just believe, to your point, can we also supplement and prioritize, this other information? Call it like college, career, and life knowledge, right? And so I believe deeply in the importance of teaching students social emotional skills, right? How do you manage your emotions? How do you have awareness? Really helping students understand critical thinking, helping them understand what you're speaking to around a strengths finder, or, just kind of different surveys that help students understand, what am I interested in? What am I good at? What do I care about? What problem do I want to solve in the future? And what skills do I have that could help me get there? And so for us, I believe strongly in that, but I'm not going to try to recreate any of those inventories. But what we do try to do is create space for students to take them. Or we even say like, hey, you know, as an added part of this, this lesson you're learning about today, whether now we have a fully digital program too, like thank you, COVID, we moved very fast. So it might be online or it might be in their classroom, but hey, here's some supplemental things you could do. Here are some free strengths assessments you could take or some free interest surveys you can take because, you know, kind of like know yourself, right? And so, and to your point, we do some of the lessons that we have, like we have students write their own core values. Like we have students think about those things because that's the missing part of school. And it shouldn't replace what school is about, but they both need to coexist inside the building.
Yeah. And I guess my point is what I find is, and you're saying, you're speaking such truth around, I say on the show all the time, I said, if you want to fix the problems of the world, you need to fix the incentive systems. And because if the incentive systems are geared towards standardized tests, I will tell you what everyone's going to be geared towards doing, teaching the test, right? If my incentive system is geared around creating adults that are functional and living their calling, I'm going to have to redesign the incentive system. And by the way, if I want to have an engaged world, which I think we all want that, I want people who are engaged members of society living their best selves. Why the frick am I teaching to a test? The test it's probably the wrong tool for assessment. It should be one part of it just to make sure they're keeping up with some level of academic rigor. That should be a quality assurance to make sure the teachers are doing part of their job. But that's one element. And what I find, and I found this in business, this is where my book, The Core Value Equation, comes to, is most of the people that design this stuff are operational people. They're coming from a strategic mindset, right? In Stagen, we're taught that's orange mindset, right? So it's around achievement. It's around what can I measure that's like black and white, and the number one person in the room wins, right? But that's not what we as humans aren't. That's not how life is. Life, that's one part of life. Unfortunately, we got to go home. We got to be with ourselves. We got to be in our heads. We got to be emotional human beings. We have to feel like we're contributing members of society. So I do think that there's an idea around and when I say this with businesses is the foundation of a business is not the strategy. The foundation of the business are the values. On top of that, you build the strategy. On top of that, you build the execution. And what I heard you just say, and I want to leave you with one question, which is, it sounds like the system is baked around execution. What are we doing to get done? What box are we checking to achieve a strategy of like meeting some minimum core curriculum requirement, right? And then we build this incentive system around that, and then you have a bunch of people coming out of school and basically not doing what we want them to do, not being educated in the way we want them to be educated in, and then we wonder why we're having problems. So I just heard you say that. So.
Well, and in so many words, I do want to like shout out. There are some cool. I mean, Dallas ISD here in where I live, clearly in Dallas, but they are doing some amazing shifts in how they think about how do you measure effectiveness, how do you think about teacher effectiveness, and not only with test scores. Like people are getting it, and they're trying to change the system. Cool. As a state, we passed legislation in the last session to help think about beginning in middle school. What are like college and career indicators that can be incentives for funding so that schools are not only being incentivized by state tests, right? So I want to say like it's happening, but it's happening in bubbles. And to your point, like just to change that broadly and really think about like what should matter and are we prioritizing that, right? And I think that could change the ecosystem and what school looks like. Yeah.
Well, maybe Betsy DeVos can get off her ass and go do something. Sorry. I'm not a fan of a lot of the people at the top at this moment. So with that said, where can people find you and what's next?
Awesome. Thank you. So find me at educationopensdoors.org. That was the motto of my classroom. My students would have to say it to get out. Very literal. I mean, I didn't lock them in, but like we said it every day when they left. And what's next? I mean, today, actually, shameless plug, it's North Texas Giving Day, which means that for us, every single donation is going to be matched dollar for dollar up to $30,000 today only. And so that's at NorthTexasGivingDay.org. If you Google it, you'd find it, or go to our website, you'll find it. But truly what's next is we want to continue to redefine the purpose of school, and we want to play our part in that, right? So, and we want to do that not only in Dallas, but I have a deep belief that students coast to coast deserve access to this information right alongside their academic content. And so we are working quickly to build and deploy a technology system to understand what does it look like to remotely coach and support teachers, to offer different versions of our program. And so all of that is in rapid development. And I think that the future is really bright. And what that means is that the future is even brighter for more students. And so I just thank you for the opportunity to share our story.
Yeah, no, so much gratitude on my side for you to share the story. I love what you're doing, and I'm so glad we got to meet through Stagen and become friends. And I want to be here to support you. So thank you so much, Jayda. You rock. You are truly part of the greatness machine. So thank you for everything that you do. And guys, on my side, it's book launch week. The book came out. Can't believe it. Oh, there you go. You got yours. So guys, we're supporting familyreach.org, which is keeping families in their homes who are suffering from financial dislocation due to cancer. I'm donating my entire book launch to them. All proceeds from the book go to them. So please, please, please buy the book. You could donate directly to them as well, but buy the book because it's really important that there's more core value driven organizations like Jayda's that are changing the world. And you know, how's the quote go? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you know, go together. And it's all about people living their core values to create greatness in the world. And that's only going to happen by more people getting educated around that. My book, I believe, does that for families and for organizations. So go to Amazon, buy the book. We're a #1 bestseller. I want to keep pushing that. I want to get on people's radars because I'm an independent author, and they don't know who I am yet. And subscribe on YouTube so you get updates on the show. Go to www.therealdarius.com. Sign up for my newsletter. I love not spamming. I only give value. So you could get show notes and stuff like that around our show that we had today. And last but not least, go to @TheRealDariusM on Facebook. Sign up, and you get all the updates on there as well. Love you guys. Appreciate you. Peace. See you guys later. Bye, everybody. Thanks, Jayda.